My name is Alara Reed, and for most of my life, I have learned to fold myself into smaller shapes. Not to hide, but to find a quiet space to breathe. It was a skill honed in the echoing halls of my family's expectations, a form of emotional origami I practiced until it became second nature. I grew up in the shadow of a grander story, one that didn't belong to me. My younger sister, Isla, was the sun. Radiant, effortless, she drew people into her orbit with a gravitational pull I could only watch from a distance. Our parents, well-meaning in their own narrow way, had cast our roles early. Isla was the vibrant one, destined for a life that would be photographed and admired. I was the practical one, the steady, quiet background against which her brilliance could shine. Alara has a good head on her shoulders, my father used to say with a fond, dismissive pat on my head. She'll always land on her feet. It was meant as a compliment, but it felt like a prophecy of a life spent close to the ground. Our childhood home in the manicured suburbs of Atherton, just south of San Francisco, was a stage for Isla's achievements. Her ballet trophies lined the mantelpiece, her honor roll certificates were framed on the wall. My own accomplishments, a state-level chess championship, a short story published in a literary journal, were met with a pleasant, "Oh, that's nice, dear." Before the conversation drifted back to Isla's lead role in the school play or her acceptance into a prestigious sorority. It wasn't malicious, it was just the way things were. They loved me, I believe, but they didn't quite see me. They saw a simpler, less complicated version of a daughter, one who required little maintenance and harbored no dazzling ambitions. So, at 21, with a degree in computer science and a heart full of unarticulated yearning, I moved north. I chose Portland, Oregon, a city shrouded in mist and pine, a place where the rain could wash away the relentless California sunshine I'd grown to resent. My family called it my bohemian phase. They pictured me in a drafty loft, writing bad poetry and working in a coffee shop. In a way, they weren't entirely wrong. The first few years were a lesson in humility. I rented a small, damp room in a shared house in the Hawthorne district, the kind of place where the scent of patchouli and old books clung to the walls. I worked a thankless data entry job during the day and ate countless dinners of rice and beans, the solitude of my small kitchen a stark contrast to the boisterous family meals I had left behind. I was lonely, often achingly so. There were nights I'd walk along the Willamette River, the city lights shimmering on the dark water, and wonder if I had made a terrible mistake. Had I run away only to find myself more lost than before? But in that quiet, unassuming life, something began to grow. Away from the shade of my sister's spotlight, a small part of me started to unfurl. In the evenings, after my mind-numbing day job, I began to work on a personal project. It was a simple idea born from a frustration I'd seen in a friend who ran a small, local delivery service. He was drowning in spreadsheets and logistical chaos. I started coding a tool for him, a clean, intuitive platform to help small businesses manage their logistics without the exorbitant cost of enterprise software. I called it Weaver Logistics. The name felt right. It was about connecting disparate threads, creating a stronger, more coherent whole. For 2 years, it was just me and my laptop, fueled by cheap coffee and a stubborn refusal to fail. I taught myself business development, marketing, and customer support. I answered emails at 3 a.m. and took feedback calls on my lunch break. It was grueling, isolating work, but it was mine. Every line of code, every small victory belonged wholly to me. I never spoke of it to my family. What would I have said? I'm building an app in my bedroom? They would have smiled that gentle, pitying smile and told me it was nice to have a hobby. Their world was one of tangible success, promotions at law firms, down payments on suburban houses, diamond rings. My fledgling company, with its handful of small, local clients, didn't fit their narrative. So I kept it to myself. My silence wasn't a secret, it was a sanctuary. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday. An email landed in my inbox from a mid-sized sustainable goods company based in Vancouver. They had heard about Weaver through a network of ethical suppliers and were impressed by its simplicity and focus. They wanted to know if it could scale. I remember staring at that email for a full hour, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was the first external validation that what I was doing wasn't just a hobby, that it had value beyond my small circle. That email changed everything. With their investment as a seed, I hired my first employee, a brilliant young programmer named Ben who shared my vision. We moved out of my bedroom and into a tiny, shared office space downtown. Slowly, meticulously, we began to grow. We landed more clients, then bigger ones. We secured a series of funding rounds that felt like a fortune, though I still drove my 10-year-old Subaru and lived in the same modest apartment. The money was never the point. The point was the act of creation, of building something meaningful from the ground up. A few years later, Weaver Logistics was acquired by a major international shipping conglomerate. The deal was quiet, handled through lawyers and non-disclosure agreements. The number that appeared in my bank account was staggering, an amount of money that felt abstract, unreal. It was enough to ensure I would never have to work again, but the work was the only thing I had ever truly wanted. So, I took a portion of the proceeds and started a new venture, an investment firm called Peregrine Holdings, dedicated to funding sustainable and ethical tech startups. I stayed out of the spotlight, preferring to be the quiet force behind other people's dreams. Through all of this, my family's perception of me remained unchanged. I was still practical Alara, the eccentric older sister who lived in rainy Portland, who never brought a date to family functions, and who, they assumed, was probably struggling to make ends meet. I never corrected them. Their ignorance had become a strange sort of shield. It allowed me to show up to holidays and birthdays as just myself, without the weight of their envy or their sudden, grasping interest. I could give thoughtful, modest gifts and not have them be interpreted as a flex. I could be present without being on display. Or so I thought. It was a warm evening in late September when Isla threw her engagement dinner at our parents' house. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine from the garden and the expensive perfume of our assembled relatives. String lights were draped across the back patio, casting a soft, golden glow on the long, linen-covered table. Everything was perfect, curated with Isla's signature flair. I arrived deliberately late, parking my dusty Subaru a block away and walking the rest of the way. I knew the sight of it in the driveway, nestled between my uncle's new Mercedes and my cousin's Tesla, would only invite the same tired jokes. As I slipped in through the side gate, my mother intercepted me, her smile a little too bright. "Alara." "We were beginning to worry," she said, her voice carrying the familiar undercurrent of gentle disapproval. It was her code for, "You're late, as usual." Isla drifted over, a vision in cream-colored silk, her hand resting casually on her fiancé's arm. The diamond on her finger caught the light, winking ostentatiously. "Alara, you made it," she said, her eyes doing a quick, dismissive scan of my simple navy blue dress. "You look comfortable." Comfortable. Practical. Simple. The words they used to keep me in my place. I smiled back, a calm, practiced expression. "Congratulations, Isla. He seems lovely." Her fiancé, Liam, extended a hand. He had a kind, open face and a firm handshake. "It's great to finally meet you. Isla's told me a lot about you." I wondered what version of me he had been told about. The quiet one? The one who ran off to Oregon? The cautionary tale? Dinner was a symphony of polite chatter and thinly veiled boasts. My cousin announced his promotion at a wealth management firm. An aunt detailed her recent kitchen renovation, sparing no expense. I sat quietly, nursing a glass of sparkling water, an island of stillness in a sea of performative success. I felt the old, familiar pang of invisibility, but it was duller now, its edges smoothed over by years of self-reliance. I no longer needed a seat at this table. I was merely a guest. My uncle, Jeff, A man who measured worth in horsepower and square footage leaned across the table. "Alara, are you still driving that old wagon?" "I swear, that thing's a relic." "You should let me get you a good deal on a lease." A few polite chuckles rippled around the table. Isla sighed, a theatrical display of sisterly concern for Liam's benefit. "She's just very frugal. Alara's always been good at making do with less." I didn't rise to the bait. I simply smiled and took a sip of my water. I owed no one an explanation. My piece was not up for negotiation. The plates from the main course were being cleared when Liam, who had been listening with a thoughtful expression, turned to me. His tone was casual, genuinely curious. "Alara, this is going to sound random," he began, "but my firm does some work in the private aviation sector. I was reviewing some flight manifests last month for a client trip to Jackson Hole, and I saw a jet chartered by a Peregrine Holdings. The primary on the account was listed as an Alara Reed out of Portland. Any relation?" A sudden, profound silence fell over the table. It was as if the sound had been vacuumed out of the air. My uncle's chuckle died in his throat. My mother's smile froze on her face. Forks clattered softly against plates. In that quiet, suspended moment, I felt every eye turn to me. They weren't looking at practical Alara anymore. They were looking at a stranger. I met Liam's gaze. There was no malice in his eyes, only inquiry. He had no idea what he had just done. He had simply picked up a thread and pulled, unraveling the carefully constructed narrative they had woven around me for decades. I held the silence for a beat longer, letting it settle. Then, with a small, steady smile, I answered. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and even. "That's me." Isla's face was a canvas of disbelief. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. "What?" she finally whispered, the single word sharp with confusion. Liam's eyebrows shot up. "Wait, the Peregrine Holdings? The one that just funded the Solara Tech merger? That was a massive deal. I've been following your work. It's brilliant." He was looking at me with genuine, unadulterated respect. It was a look I had never once received from anyone at this table. The silence that followed was different now. It was heavy, thick with unspoken questions and the frantic whirring of minds trying to recalibrate a lifetime of assumptions. My frugal, impractical, bohemian life had just been exposed as a fiction of their own making. My mother found her voice first. "Alara, what is he talking about?" "A jet." Before I could answer, Isla let out a short, sharp laugh. It sounded brittle, like breaking glass. "She's joking," she said, looking around the table for confirmation. "She has to be. Right, Alara?" Her eyes pleaded with me, but not for the truth. She was pleading with me to return to my designated role, to smooth over this awkward moment and restore the familiar order of things where she was the center of the universe. I looked at her, at the panic flickering behind her carefully constructed poise. And in that moment, I felt a wave of something that wasn't pity, but a deep, sorrowful understanding. Her world was built on a foundation of external validation, and I had just inadvertently caused a tremor. I slowly folded my linen napkin and placed it on the table. "Actually," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "I have an early start tomorrow. I should probably get going." "But we haven't even had dessert," my mother protested, her tone verging on frantic. The script had been abandoned, and she didn't know her lines. "I know," I said softly, "but it's time for me to go." I stood up, my chair making a soft scraping sound on the stone patio. I walked around the table, the eyes of my family following me like a spotlight. For the first time, I was the one on stage, and I didn't have to perform. My very existence was the performance. As I reached the gate, I heard my cousin murmur to his wife, his voice filled with awe and confusion, "She owns a jet?" I didn't look back. The short walk to my car felt like crossing a threshold. The night air was cool on my skin, and the distant sound of the party, the music, the laughter, already seemed to belong to another world, another life. I slid into the driver's seat of my old Subaru and just sat there for a moment, my hands resting on the worn steering wheel. The engine, when I started it, was a familiar, comforting rumble. I wasn't leaving in a blaze of glory. I was just leaving. And in that simple act, I felt a sense of profound liberation. I hadn't come to the dinner seeking a confrontation. I hadn't come to prove a point. But the truth had arrived anyway, uninvited and undeniable. I drove away from the tree-lined streets of my childhood, not with anger or triumph, but with a quiet, bone-deep sense of peace. For years, I had made myself small to fit into their world. Tonight, I had simply stood up and allowed myself to be my actual size. And it turned out their world was too small to contain me. Later that night, as I sat in my quiet apartment overlooking the glittering lights of Portland, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Liam. "Hey, Alara. I'm really sorry if I made things awkward tonight. I had no idea. I just genuinely admire what you've built with Peregrine. Your investment philosophy is changing the game." I smiled. He wasn't apologizing for revealing the truth. He was apologizing for the social disruption it had caused. He understood the rules of their world, even if he didn't play by them. I typed back, "Don't be sorry." It wasn't awkward. It was just clear. A moment later, he replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji. It was enough. The next morning, the floodgates opened. A text from my mother. "We need to talk. Why would you hide all of this from us?" The question was laced with a sense of betrayal, as if my success was something I had stolen from them. I didn't owe them my struggles, so why did they feel entitled to my triumphs? I read the message and set my phone down without replying. My silence was no longer about keeping the peace, it was about protecting it. Then came a cheerful message from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 5 years, asking if I wanted to get coffee and catch up. An aunt sent a gushing email filled with newfound admiration and a not-so-subtle inquiry about investment advice for her son. Suddenly, I was a person of interest, a resource to be tapped, a story to be told. The invitations felt hollow, transactional. They weren't interested in knowing me, Alara. They were interested in knowing the woman with the jet. I declined each request politely but firmly, with a simple, "Thank you for thinking of me, but I'm afraid my schedule is full." Each no was a small act of self-preservation, a reinforcement of the boundaries I had spent years building. A week passed in relative silence. I threw myself back into my work, finding solace in the familiar rhythm of spreadsheets, meetings, and the quiet satisfaction of helping another founder's dream take flight. I hiked in the dense, green forests of the Columbia River Gorge, the scent of damp earth and pine filling my lungs. I felt the tension of that evening slowly dissipate, replaced by a sense of calm certainty. I had not destroyed my family, I had simply stopped participating in the fiction that held it together. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID read Isla. My first instinct was to ignore it. I imagined the conversation, the accusations, the jealousy, the demand for an explanation that I was unwilling to give. But something made me answer. Perhaps it was a flicker of the old sisterly bond, a stubborn hope that beneath the layers of rivalry and misunderstanding, something real remained. I took a deep breath and swiped to answer. "Hello." There was a pause on the other end, a beat of hesitation. "Alara." Isla's voice was different. The usual confident, musical lilt was gone, replaced by a quiet uncertainty I had never heard before. "I'm here," I said. Liam told me more about your company," she began, her words tentative. "About what you do. Funding businesses that are trying to do some good. He said you're one of the most respected people in your field." I didn't say anything, letting her find her way. "I keep replaying that night in my head," she continued, her voice cracking slightly. "All the things I said. About you being frugal. All the jokes Uncle Jeff made that I just let happen." There was another long pause. "I don't think I ever once asked you what you were working on." "Not really. I just assumed." The admission hung in the air between us. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was something far more valuable. It was the truth. It was the first honest sentence she had spoken to me in years. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" she asked, and this time, the question didn't feel like an accusation. It sounded like a genuine, painful mystery she was trying to solve. I thought for a moment, searching for an answer that was both true and kind. Maybe I began slowly because I needed to build it for myself first, away from everyone's expectations. I took a breath, including my own. I could hear her exhale softly on the other end of the line. "The way everyone looked at you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Liam, a man I've been trying to impress for a year, looked at you with more respect than he's ever looked at me." The raw vulnerability in her confession startled me. For the first time, I saw past the radiant, effortless facade to the person underneath, someone who was just as trapped by her role as I had been by mine. She was the sun, yes, but perhaps she was tired of being expected to burn so brightly all the time. "He respects you, Isla," I said, and I meant it. "Does he?" she asked, and the question was so full of doubt it made my heart ache. Or does he respect the idea of me? We were quiet for a long time after that, the silence on the line no longer empty, but filled with the weight of everything that had gone unsaid for 30 years. "I'm sorry, Ilara," she finally said, and the words were quiet, unadorned, and devastatingly sincere. "For not seeing you." Tears pricked my eyes. I hadn't realized how much I had needed to hear that, not until this very moment. It wasn't about the money or the success. It was about being seen. "I see you too, Isla," I whispered. It was not a perfect resolution. It was not a magical healing of all the old wounds. The patterns of a lifetime do not unravel in a single phone call. But it was a beginning. It was a crack of light in a door that had been closed for a very long time. We ended the call without making plans, without any promises of a changed future. There was still so much to navigate, so much to unlearn. But as I hung up, I looked out my window at the city below, at the bridges stitching the land together over the dark, flowing river. I had spent so long learning to keep my power quiet, to fold myself into smaller shapes. But power isn't meant to be hidden. It's meant to be owned. And true strength isn't about proving others wrong. It's about having the grace to allow them, and yourself, the space to change. My family may never fully understand the path I took, but for the first time, it felt possible that they might be willing to learn the way. And I, in turn, was finally ready to let them try. The quiet space I had carved out for myself was no longer a refuge from them, but a foundation from which I could finally, gently reach back.